as I said before, they're kind of these narratives in the draft that I think kind of get beaten to death. And one of them is Justin Fields. And, first it was about how no Ohio State quarterback's ever good in the NFL. And that's kind of true. You look at the names. Dwayne Haskins is kind of like the newest, guy, but that's no way to judge Fields off of. Then it was his work ethic, because I think, like they said, he's the last guy in, first guy out, which to me doesn't make much sense, because he played in, the semifinal national championship with broken ribs and outplayed Trevor Lawrence. And then the third thing was, he looks at receivers too long, and he's not good at going through his progressions. And, you have guys like Mac Jones who are just being, pushed up the draft boards for, to me, I don't really understand why. And you talk about if character concerns, talk about Mac Jones has multiple DUIs on his record. I mean, that's something I think you have to talk about. And Fields, clean record, nothing wrong with him. And you're talking about he's, the work ethic issues. And I don't know. I think Fields, if he drops, he's going to be, I think, a steal. Maybe if it's 10, maybe if it's 11, that's a steal for a guy like him. And I think he's more of a pro-ready prospect than even a guy like Zach Wilson. I think he has a less arm talent than Wilson, but I think he's still very talented and he can run, diverse skill set. I think he has a pretty good delivery. I don't think he looks at, receivers too long. And like, if I'm one of these teams, like if the Patriots get him, if they're able to like trade up to 12, I'd be like, this is like Bill Belichick, I think, like sending out these rumors so he can go, get him. But that's, to me, I want to start. It's just like, you see Mac Jones rising up lists for me for like no reason, and Justin Fields falling. And I think Fields could be, one of these guys that, is, falls to like 12 and ends up being one of the better quarterbacks. Like, that's almost what I feel about him. And again, I feel like for him, that's really tough, because he fell for no reason. Like, that's, nothing in his control, at least.
Yeah, I feel really strongly about this. Ton to talk about. First up, the Ohio State thing. Like, oh, you went to Ohio State.
Yeah.
That's such a lazy take, right? Every prospect, every quarterback is different. You evaluate them all differently. Just because he went to a school that doesn't produce good quarterbacks doesn't mean he's going to be good. That's ridiculous. So I never understood that. And I think it's fascinating, because going into last season, Andrew, like it was Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, like 1A, 1B. It was like 1A, 1B. It was such a close, gap. There was, some people argued that Fields was even better. And Fields, he had an up and down year, a lot of up, maybe 1.5 games of down. And for his character and his work ethic to be attacked is shocking, because we saw him, as you mentioned, in that semifinal game against Clemson, tear up an NFL defense in Clemson's defense, playing with broken ribs, bruised everything. He had every injury in the book. He was getting rocked out there. He was still moving. He was fighting. He had guts. Like, he showed guts. He still showed his arm talent as well, which I do think it's not Zach Wilson's arm talent, but it's right there. It's still a great arm. He's mobile, as you said. He's dynamic, and he just has such a skill set that Mac Jones has none of those traits. Mac Jones doesn't have the mobility. Mac Jones isn't quick like him. So I do think, like, you have to look at that. So I'm really shocked. Like, I don't really get it at all. My one thing, like, conspiracy a little bit, is some team is planting some seeds, hoping that he can fall them a little bit. I can't think of anything else, because Justin Fields is a spectacular talent. He's my quarterback 3 right now. I think the Niners should pick him. I don't know why, Mac Jones is getting catapulted, as you talked about, from, going into this year, he was not even a draft guy. Then he was kind of a day 2 guy, then late first round, and now we're talking about 3rd overall. So I think that is fascinating to see. And I always love NFL draft time, like this time out, because the narratives build who's a leader, who wasn't a captain, all this stuff. I think it's ridiculous, because at the end of the day, the talent is going to show in Justin Fields, and he has so much of it. So yeah, I think these are baseless claims. I think that people attacking him for the Ohio State thing, they're lazy. And I think Justin Fields, just like you said, spectacular talent. I would pick him 3rd overall if I were the Niners. We'll see what happens. Part of me thinks it's smoke just because someone wants him to fall. I hope so, because these claims are really unfair. You've seen everyone come to his defense who played with him. Yeah. And it's just not true. He wasn't the first guy out. He wasn't the last guy in. They were debunking these narratives. And so it's fascinating to see what's going to happen, because I think the draft, he could really go anywhere. He could go 3, he could go 15. It is fascinating to see his ceiling when he was a guy going into the year who was 1A, 1B with Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, and like that's the thing. Like, he's like, I think, like, and you can make an argument, I think, between him and Zach Wilson. And I think it depends. For me, it's like the preference of what you want. I think Wilson has the bigger ceiling, and like, he's the guy that, you see you see it all. I don't have to get into it, but I think he has the higher ceiling. But looking at a guy like Fields, He's the guy that's going to, I think, be more pro ready right away. And then Wilson, I think he's going to need some coaching. I think like Mahomes, like I think to become Mahomes, he needed Andy Reid. And I think that's, you talk about Wilson, who has like that Mahomes type arm, he's going to need an Andy Reid if he wants to reach his full potential. And, I think for the Jets' sake, we'll see if they have it or they don't with their new coaching. And, we really haven't seen, anything yet. So we'll just have to watch that out. But, with Justin Fields, he's a guy that'll be more pro ready. Maybe his ceiling isn't as higher, but I think he'll still be a solid QB. And like you talk about the Ohio State thing, I mean, how lazy is it? I mean, we're going to be talking about a guy like, Zach Wilson is from BYU. We're going to compare him to Taysom Hill just because they both played at BYU. Like, I mean, it's just, it's baseless. It makes no sense because you go with, because like Ohio State gets the comparisons. Also, Alabama gets the comparisons too. I think all the big schools, but you look at the small schools. I mean, like for BYU, everyone talks about like Steve Young. Besides him, really much. So like it makes to me no sense, that one. And again, I feel like Fields, it's just, I mean, and like talking about Mac Jones, and I don't know if this is like a big knock on Mac Jones, what I'm about to say, but like for me, I think he's in the Kyle Trask, Kellen Mond. Like I think that he's there, lit it up in college, and just I feel like they could be pro quarterbacks and maybe they'll start, but I don't think they're going to be like MVP type guys, really just tearing up the league. But they did in college. It'll be interesting. Like that's why I feel like he's more out that second, third round guy compared to the top three. I just don't understand it. I just don't see it. I think there are things about him that are, solid, but I mean, he's throwing wide open receivers. I mean, look at his receivers over the last 2 years. Those four guys all went in the, top 15. So that's to me is most interesting about these quarterbacks and talking about them. It just makes no sense for me between, Jones and Fields.